If your characters are done trying to settle things with words and are on the verge of settling things with their fists, then you may need to write a fight scene, which will ironically require a bunch of words. And just like the melees that they describe, writing a fight scene is filled with all sorts of dangerous attacks from all sides for the unprepared writer. At their worst, fight scenes become a jumbled mess of unintelligible and confusing action, and fail to deliver the sort of emotional sucker punch that you might have intended. So today, I'm going to give you some advice so you can fight back against some of the blows that a fight scene can land on the unprepared writer. That's not gonna work. I'm gonna take these things off. All right, round one of this fight against fight scenes has to do with managing complexity. The hardest part, at least for me, whether reading or writing a fight scene, is just keeping track of everything. In a novel or other written work, you don't have the luxury of the reader being able to see what's going on at a glance like you do in some kind of visual medium. There's certainly advantages to this, as you can have more control over what the reader sees, but conveying blocking and location and positions and speed and status and velocity and whatever else for a bunch of characters engaged in some sort of fight is really tough to do. A fast-moving fight between a bunch of characters can become impossible to follow very easily. You end up in this situation where you need to convey a ton of fast-paced information, but the volume of information that you need to convey will naturally slow down the action because there's so much to describe. Anytime you approach a fight scene, whether it's two characters in a karate fight or two field armies in a pitched battle, you need to understand how you're going to manage the ensuing complexity. You need a plan for how you're going to get all the information describing the scene across to the reader, because even a fairly small fight scene is going to have a lot of information to convey. I think that focusing on a tiny element of that bigger fight scene is a big help here. This is probably what your characters are going to do anyway if they're engaged in a fight. You don't need to describe everything about the position of the opponent's body. You just need to describe the fist coming towards your character's face. You don't need to describe the entire battlefield, just the foxhole that your squad is rushing towards under machine gun fire. Focusing in on smaller details, narrowing the scope of what you're describing, reduces the overall amount of information you need to get across and reduces the complexity. Focus on the most impactful, sometimes literally, part of the broader fight in any given moment. You're obviously going to shift focus throughout the scene, but in any one moment, really try to zoom in on the most important bit, even if that means not describing other things that aren't as important. Disorientation is also your friend here, and something that's likely to happen to your characters if they're getting knocked in the head a bunch. If smoke obscures the battlefield or a punch dazes a character, then you have an excuse not to describe anything except the stars that they're now seeing through their concussed eyes. It's been said before, but the way that you tell big stories is by telling a really impactful small story. This applies to fight scenes as well. Another thing that really helps with fight scenes is direction. Characters need to have a goal for the fight, something that all of the action is working towards, and that goal needs to be clear to the reader. The goal could be to get the squad up to a certain hill. It could be to knock out all the bad guys swarming the alley, to chase after the car that's speeding away. It could be to survive until reinforcements show up. Even if the character is just having a fist fight with their arch nemesis, there should be a clear goal, a clear reward that they receive if they happen to win the fight. On the subject of winning, you also want to think about what winning looks like. This is tied closely to the goal of the fight, but you also want to consider things like when is the enemy defeated or when is the character defeated. Sometimes this is really obvious, like something like a boxing match or if there's two fighter planes in a dogfight or something, but sometimes it isn't super obvious. You see this sometimes in like martial arts fights where it's not clear like at what point does somebody win and at what point does somebody lose. You really want the reader to know how close the hero or the villain is to either victory or defeat, and in order to do that, you need to understand what victory or defeat in that fight means and make sure the reader understands that. This is going to kind of come out of left field, although maybe not because we're talking about fight scenes, but pro wrestling has this aspect mastered. If you ever watch a pro wrestling match, there is almost always in every single moment one combatant who is clearly winning and one who is clearly losing. And this balance shifts back and forth all throughout the fight. You want the same sort of thing in the fight scenes that you write. The same concept applies whether it's two wizards squaring off or a bunch of infantry troops landing on a beach. You want clear goals and clear delineations between victory and defeat. You want the reader to understand at any moment in the fight who is winning and who is losing. Speaking of losing things, let's talk about the bodily damage your characters are receiving throughout the fight. Here is where the tone and the level of suspension of disbelief play a part in deciding what can and can't work. Read through any even moderately violent piece of fiction and you'll see characters taking punches that would knock a normal person out cold, or falling off heights that would break legs, or taking a bat to their legs, which would also break their legs. This is a decision that you need to make for your story. It's going to depend on your tone and genre and how much realism you're going for. You don't necessarily need to have a realistic response to the impacts of a fight on a character. Suspension of disbelief is a thing, and you can use this to push characters past normal human limits. However, if you want to go for a more realistic tone, or if the fight involves some kind of equipment like a fighter jet absorbing a certain number of missiles, then you're going to have to do some research. You're going to have to make sure that you're consistent if you've got multiple fight scenes in your novel. Otherwise, readers are going to see this stuff and they're going to have problems. Lots of stories handle injuries or other bodily damage in very unrealistic ways, and readers are fine with it for the most part. There is a level of believability to all aspects of storytelling, and doing this with fight scenes is no different. This also applies to things like fight choreography. Did you know that even if you're a karate master, fighting 3 opponents at once is almost always a losing proposition in real life? Because real people don't attack one at a time like they do in the movies. This is just another level of realism that you're going to have to think about. If your lone character is able to knock out 50 bad guys who are all trained in martial arts, that might be a little bit unbelievable, but given the tone and mood of your story, that might be okay. Speaking of things that are okay, mostly just okay, the conclusion to this video is just okay. So there you have it. If you have any thoughts on writing a good fight scene, please share them in the comments down below. Hopefully things don't turn into a verbal brawl down there. Anyway, if you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.